Reverend Mike Marsh is an Episcopal priest in Uvalde, Texas. He and I met last year shortly after the shooting in Highland Park, and he has become a very important part of my life. This interview was recorded the week after the first anniversary of the shooting in Uvalde. All right, here we go. Mike, it's good to see you.
I'm glad to be here. It's good to see you too, Bruce. It's been a while.
It's been a while. I've missed you. I want to hear first and foremost, tell me about last week.
Well, I guess the summary of it is we got through it. I think the things that we did at St. Philip's went well. I was pleased with that. Overall, the town was pretty quiet. There's a few individual protesters that had signs about Uvalde Strong or prosecute Pete Arredondo, but for the most part, people were quiet and well behaved. There had been some social media threats of another school shooting that would be worse than the previous year, but none of that happened. So I think everybody's just happy to have gotten through it.
Do you hear how low that bar is? And we're laughing about it. So there was a document that came out in Highland Park a couple weeks ago that people aren't happy with. I think the city is trying to help people transition from the shock and the pain to moving, quote unquote, forward, whatever that means. Mm-hmm. So the document came out asking people, A, not to refer to Highland Park as a massacre, B, not to use Highland Park Strong anymore, but Highland Park Together. How do you feel about the Uvalde Strong mantra? What does that mean to you?
You know, I'm not sure exactly what it means. I mean, I think it was intended to be kind of, we're together, we're going to get through this, we're strong enough to survive this as a community, we'll come out on the other side. And I think those are big hopes, big ideas. I think at a kind of a more tangible day-to-day life, I'm not sure how strong we are. I mean, I hope we're strong enough to have difficult conversations and face issues that have plagued our community for years, but I don't know if we will.
What are those conversations?
Oh, I think it has to be conversations about racism, about poverty, about family support, about employment, about bullying, about trust of one another.
Is that all?
It could go on for a little while.
Yeah, keep going. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
We're just kind of in some ways, I feel like we're a microcosm of America that's had the light shined on it. And I suspect these conversations are needed in a lot of places.
What's the racial makeup of Uvalde?
You know, it's probably, it varies, I would say 85% Mexican-American, 15% white.
So as you just made a statement that we need to have these conversations, and you said them as a white male in a predominantly non-white community. Speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, at least from my perspective, it has to be a conversation that begins with listening. I don't think and I hate to use they and us, but I don't think they need more of me telling them what I think. You know, that we need to be able to just have a conversation and listen to one another. And it seems, you know, it seems if there's anything that's brought us together, it ought to be our pain. And yet our pain, I think, has increased our division.
How?
You know, there's people that have experienced the pain and they're in a place of security, stability, privilege that say, we just want to move on and get back to normal. There's people that have experienced the pain and they've lost a child and they'll never move on in the same way. There's division in between the parents whose children died and the parents whose children were injured and survived. There's division between the parents whose children were directly affected by this and their trust of the city and of law enforcement. There's division within the city, between the city and the DA's office about trying to get information. Um,
And you've been navigating this as clergy.
Trying to.
Yeah, what's that been for you? Easy, I
Um,
know, because it's all
yeah,
easy, right?
I guess the first word that came to mind is lonely. Um, Lonely and a bit overwhelming. Um, and kind of feeling and it's funny. I just before this, I finished my session with my therapist, and 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 stuff was going on, and she says, "So what do you need?" I said, "I need 2 weeks away where I don't have to answer the phone or an email, where I don't have to help anybody, where I don't have to listen to what their problems are. I just need 2 weeks away of not caring for anybody." And it's terrible to say, but that's what I need, because it feels like used to my parishioners were the ones that I primarily tried to care for. And for whatever reason, some of it I put on myself. I feel like it's the whole town now, that somebody's got to speak and do something. And I don't say that in a way that I'm the guy, but I just say it as I'm one of the guys that feels like he's got to do something.
Well, so we've known each other now 9 months.
Yeah.
We're going to come back to that in a minute. And so what I hear you saying to me, based on the you that I know, is that you need 2 weeks away from yourself.
A good way to put it.
Because I don't know that getting to, I mean, you've been away already. I am still so incredibly touched by the fact that the centering, how much your concern has been for the parents, for the family of the shooter.
Mm.
That you've entered into spaces, right, across the spectrum in Uvalde, having to be with parents when their kids are identified in the shooting, being
Right.
so trying to be there for the white population, that part of them wants to move on and part of them doesn't, for the families of the victims, for the shooters whose his family's also. How do you hold all that?
Um, Carefully, um, with a great sense of privilege, that Salvador's grandparents invite us into their home. Um, his grandmother calls and kind of updates me on what she's up to. They came to church during Holy Week and last week and week before. And I've always told them, I said, I'm not doing any of this because I want you to come to church. So I hope you don't have any expectations that you need to, or that you feel obligated to me. Because I really don't. Whether if they come, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine. But they've opened themselves to me. Some of the families, especially the families who I had took to see their daughter. And just that we all through mostly May, we opened the church to the community. And because I said, the anticipation of these days is often worse than the day itself. And if you just need a quiet place to come sit and light a candle and be left alone, you're welcome to come and go. There's no obligation. You don't have to be a member. You don't have to join. There's no service. There's no preaching. You'll get a little bag with some prayers, holy water, blessed candle, and some chocolate chip cookies, and do what you want. And people said, that I had 2 or 3 people say, I never came, but it meant a lot to me that the church was open and you invited us. Um,
Did people hold it against you that you were reaching out to his family as well?
um, my guess is most people don't know that.
Hmm.
Um,
Now they do.
Thanks, Bruce. There's some people in the parish that do, because, and I picked them pretty intentionally to help because they've fixed meals, they've gone grocery shopping, they've taken gifts. Um, I guess last year after the shooting, some people recognized that I had put out 22 candles on the street, and we rang the bell 22 times. And some people were appreciative of that, and some were pretty upset, angry about it.
I think I told you we had a member of our congregation who, thank God, started having us whenever we listed the names of people who died in tragedies, in attacks, to also list the shooter or the person who perpetrated it if they died as well, and the how jarring that was for me and continues to be,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I feel it's so important to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I often hear politicians or the media say, we're not going to mention their name, we're not going to give them that. And you know what? I've really come to think about that. And I understand their place. And I don't know, but my guess is many of those people lived unnamed through their lives. And that's part of what brought
Mm.
them to this point, that they hadn't been named and they hadn't been recognized and they hadn't been included.
So how do you answer to the fact that there's been millions of people in that situation and they haven't done what these few have done? So why should they be named? I agree with you, and
Um,
I'm pushing back.
I guess it's not my judgment or place to determine who gets to be named and who remains unnamed. Right? That's if I go back to the gospel, I mean, Jesus spent most of his time with the unnamed people, um, and regardless of what Salvador did, um, he was still somebody's child and somebody's grandchild and a child of God. And I'm
Hmm.
not the one to terminate or end those parental relationships.
I have a lot of respect for you and a lot of appreciation. So I called you back in August. It must have been. What did you think when you picked up the phone? Because have I ever told you what I thought when you picked up the phone? Have we had this conversation?
Yeah, you mentioned.
I thought that I stumbled through the whole thing. I'm like, oh my god, he actually answered the phone. What am I going to say? Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. What was your take on me calling you?
um, I was pretty impressed and moved by it. I thought it took courage, um, and I thought it was, for me, it was compassion and pastoral care, like because there's not a lot of people to talk to. Right? It's like I said earlier, it's a lonely place, even on the best of days without a shooting.
Hmm.
It's still a lonely place. Um, and to have somebody to talk to that, from a place that's brand new, a brand new friendship, right? There's no hierarchical relationship within either one of our positions. There's no history, there's no expectations. There's just, hey, this happened to me, this happened to you. Let's come around it and see where our friendship goes, how we can help one another, how we could make changes beyond ourselves. I thought
I've
it was a
really,
gift. It was a
I've really,
gift.
I've really appreciated it and you. It's been incredibly helpful, edifying, and just peaceful.
Yeah.
Collective painful too. And with Brad, I mean, bringing Brad in when he comes in
Right.
from Parkland as well.
Yeah.
trying to grow
Yeah.
this wonderful circle of ours. What
Yeah. It's one of those clergy friendships that I look forward to.
one of those 2D ones that have to get 3D eventually. What you keep talking about the loneliness. What does that feel like?
Um, I guess it feels a bit overwhelming, lonely in the sense that, in the, I think in the best of our days in this vocation, and I think my guess is it's probably true for you, people really don't know what I do. um, and some of that's just their perception, some of it's mine, but I think most really don't understand what it's like day to day. I mean, how could they? I mean, um,
I have no idea what I do on any given day. I don't know how they would be
yeah.
able to get it.
So, I mean, unless you've done it, you really don't get it. And unless you're with somebody and can talk to somebody that does get it, that has struggled with it, um, but there's a loneliness, a loneness to it, um, because it's not just half a day on Sundays.
Was there ever a place or point in your life in which that loneliness wasn't felt because of a particular relationship with the divine? And has that changed at all since the shooting last year?
Um, your question makes me think of a book I read entitled "Alone with the Alone." Um, I mean, I guess so. I guess there's a sense in which the presence of the divine, I've experienced that, um, but I don't know that it's taken away the loneliness. Right? It's probably one of the things I've thought and said about this experience is that it's called me more deeply into my priesthood. Um, and at the same time, it's called most everything of my priesthood into question. Everything that I thought I believed, thought I knew about the world, about God, about myself. Um, and I don't necessarily see that as a diminishment, but it's an opening. It's I feel like I've been vacillate between being broken and being broken open. Um, and sometimes it's hard to tell which is which. So
See,
that's part of my experience of the loneliness.
I think that's an incredibly profound way of saying it. That space between being broken and being broken open. The statement implies that you had foundational assumptions that in the past year you have had to revisit.
Yeah.
Can you go into detail about that?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think those foundational assumptions started crumbling before this, um, mostly with the death of our son. And so they were already crumbly, and on the way out, this helped finish it off. That you know the ideas or the doctrines or the beliefs that there's this all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present, divine God, whatever. Um, and I tried to, I mean, that's what we're taught to believe. It's what I tried to believe, but it was never my experience. Um, because in some ways that omni God, the more omni God is, my experience was the further God gets away. Um, and so, you know, the weak God is the God I know and the God that knows me.
Whew.
Um, right, that the weak God who, you know, in Jesus weeps at the death of Lazarus. The weak God whose heart breaks just as hard and just as often as does mine. And I mean, I hear I think it's the psalmist, how long, O Lord, how long, O God? And I've said that, and I kind of get, this image of God saying, how long, my people? How long? When are y'all going to do something? Right? I mean, it goes both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I've often said in our Torah classes when we debate, when people say, when's God going to stop this, or why is God doing this to us? I said, have you ever looked at it from God's perspective? And I always say, like the old Jewish man, I say it like this with my hands. Right? You can imagine her up there going, when enough people already. When are you going to get it?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Do you talk to me? Do you subscribe to the idea of hope?
Guess it depends on what you mean by hope.
Well, whatever it means to you. I mean, look, we're
Um,
dealing. You and I came together through this space of incredible tragedy,
yeah.
and we have spent a lot of time together over the past 9 months, 8, 9 months, really kind of being there with each other in that space, trying to figure it out. I've quoted you at sermons talking about we haven't really gotten to the question. No one's talking about the real issue here, and I want to come
Mm-hmm.
back to that. And through the pandemic and local pain and communal pain and the ripples of pain, and then all being taken in our own. What gets us out of that space to be able to move forward and to be something genuine for people?
Well, I mean, I think if you're going back to your question about hope, I think it
Yeah.
does have to do with hope, but I don't think I think we often mistake hope as kind of wishful thinking, or that things are going to get better, or that someday we'll get what we want. Right. And
If
my
that's not
grandmother,
hope, then what is it?
well, my grandmother used to say, you can wish in one hand and spit in the other, see which one fills up first. Right. So
I love grandmas. Grandmas say the greatest things. Yeah, keep going. Keep going.
so I think hope has to be more than just wishful fantasizing thinking. That hope is getting out of bed and touching my feet on the floor when the day I don't want to get out of bed, when I don't think I can. It's leaving the house when all I want to do is hide. Hope in some ways, I think is hope is never more real than it is when you're hoping against hope, right? When you hope in the darkness. That hope is, at least for me, it's part of what keeps me open to the future.
It
You know,
doesn't set
like
us up for failure. That sounds really dark. I don't mean it that way, but actually, I do mean it that way. It doesn't set us if
no,
you're always hoping. No?
no, I don't think it does. I mean, I think it's part of what keeps the present moment from collapsing in on itself. That hope helps me stay open to the future. And I mean, I love this. It comes from John Caputo, and he says, "And the future is always better, not because it necessarily will be, but it might be. And if I don't have the might be of hope, I've given up. I might as well lay down and quit."
Hmm.
Um,
You're saying that from the great state of Texas, which every day when you open up the paper gives you something else to push back against your hope. So if in fact your relationship with God has evolved and is you're having you're what's the word I want? You're not struggling with it for sure, but it's evolving.
Right.
And you see power in the hands of people who are provoking pain instead of creating solutions and opportunities. How do you occupy that space?
Um, I can't let them be the reason I betray myself or lose my own integrity. Um, that I can't let them determine what I choose to do or not do as far as continuing the work. And I was talking with John Deere, a Catholic priest that teaches and writes and practices nonviolence. And he said, Mike, you just got to do something. He said, it may not work. He said, it probably won't work, but you can't not do something.
Hmm.
You just keep doing it. And I think he didn't say this, but for me, what that means is to not do something would be self-betrayal. It'd be a betrayal of my vocation in the gospel. That it's part of how I maintain my own integrity, and that it becomes more. And this is kind of more and more how I think of my priesthood. Is it's just an offering, right? It's all I have is to offer myself in whatever way I can, without expectations of what the outcome will or should be, and without expectations of a return from someone.
Hmm.
It's a hard place to be, but more and more, that's kind of how I see it.
But it's almost impossible for you to be the empathic person that you are and as engaged as you are and not be befuddled by disappointment.
Right. No, there are the days of disappointment. There are plenty of bike rides where I cry and cuss.
Mm.
Right. My
Yeah.
therapist has job security.
We gotta give a shout out to this person. That's twice in one half hour. Not bad. So going back to Uvalde, you alluded to it, and if you if you read in the news at all, you see that it is a divided town right now in terms of issues even of gun control. Is a solution to arm teachers or disarm people? Is it what's going on with all that? Building fences around schools.
um, yeah, so there's, at least in here in town, there's not much talk about gun control. The mayor recently came out, and I think they quoted him as saying we need to have a conversation about that. And I think that's a pretty big step. Um, the parents of some of the children who died or were injured or have been active at the Capitol and then trying to get some legislation moving. Um, but as far as an overall conversation, there hasn't been a lot of energy around that. Most of the energy has gone to increasing security, building fences, creating programs where teachers and school staff can carry weapons.
I was talking to my son, teacher in Tennessee, and he said that that's his red line. He's assuming it's going to happen, that they're going to insist that teachers arm themselves.
Yeah.
What? So yeah. The solution is to make kids feel safer by letting them walk into a fenced-in or walled-in area, so they feel like they're in prison and have all their teachers heavily armed, so that they can learn in peace and security.
Right.
What is behind that? So that's getting to what you and I have talked about so much. So what is behind all of this hyper not masculinity, hyper machismo, hyper kind of armor. What I can't even get the words out today. What's going on?
I wish I knew. I mean, I think it's my analogy, the way I think about it, we're treating symptoms and not the disease. Um, and I don't know. I think there's you know, a fear and a denial of what would happen if we actually asked the hard questions and if we actually began having conversations around those. That I recently read something, um, and the writer made a distinction between containment and relatedness, and I think we're containing, and it's to the detriment of our relatedness to one another. Um,
All right, so go on, go on.
I just said we live life in containers, rather than in relationship with one another. And the containers become my whiteness or my privilege, my education, my wealth, a taller fence around the school, teacher with a handgun, more patrol cars through town. Um,
Hmm.
and each container separates us, I think, a little further from one another and from ourselves.
Despite the problems, did you feel prior to the shooting that the residents of Uvalde had a neighborliness about them, or no?
That they had what?
Neighborliness. They had a sense of relationship at all?
Um, yeah, um, I don't know. I would say there was an equilibrium or a balance had been achieved within the system, but I don't know that it was a system of neighborliness.
Hmm.
I think everybody knew their part and played it well, and it worked kind of, but not really.
Until it didn't.
Yeah. And I
All right,
think
someone.
that's what the shooting did. It revealed that it really didn't work. Shooting didn't cause these things. It revealed and intensified them, but I don't think it caused most of the problems we have.
So what's the real question? You and I have been going back and forth for 8 months about this. What's the real? You say we're addressing the symptoms. What's the cause? Is it this relatedness or is it something more?
I don't know. I think part of it's the relatedness. I think part of it is the a culture of individualism, but not individuality, but individualism. A culture of individualism, um, a culture of a racist system, a culture that, for whatever reason, isn't able to recognize a common and shared humanity.
I don't think that there's individualism. I think there's only. We talk about the idea of rugged individualism in
Mm-hmm.
America, but there has been nobody in America that's ever done it alone,
No,
right?
there hasn't.
And individualism is only for the one who has succeeded in benefiting as much as they can from the community from which they come,
Right.
to
Yeah.
allow them to feel the sense of individualism.
Yeah, I think it's an illusion that we live with and in some ways strive for, that we put an expectation on people, right? But we don't account for the system. I mean, it's can't think of who the attorney general is in Minnesota that led the prosecution of the George Floyd murder. But he was talking about, because someone asked him and said, well, what about one of those police officers was black? And he said, it doesn't matter. I mean, the individual could be the same race, and the individual comes in with the idea to reform police because that's what he wanted. But then the individual gets lost in the system, and the system takes over. Um, so we're dealing with systemic issues but we make it about individuals. It's about police officer that didn't enter and take out the shooter. It's about Salvador and what he did and didn't do. But there are pieces within the system.
Hmm.
It's not to excuse either one of them or justify what they did, but we got to look at both.
It contextualizes.
Yeah, we got to look at both.
What do you really want? I'm lobbing at you easy questions this whole conversation, by the way. I'm having a great time because I'm just asking them. I'm not answering them. What do you really want?
Well, I learned this from a bright rabbi. He said, do you want what the old rabbis, their wisdom, what they would say the answer is?
Don't do that to me.
I don't know, Bruce. What do you want?
Yeah, I don't know. What do you want? No. What do you think? No.
I mean, here's something. What something I would like if we would just start being nice to one another. If we could just be nice in our actions, in our words, be polite. And I never thought I would say that because for so long I said, come on, people, Christianity is more than just being polite and nice to one another. You got to be more than that. Well, right now, that seems like a really good start. If we could be nice to ourselves. Right?
Well, so that Southern charm, and I'm not that veneer of niceness, which is called
Right.
Southern charm, which I'm not holding casting aspersions against the South and saying that, really has always been there to suggest that it is a veneer because there's something beneath it. So is it really, do we really want people to be nice to each other, understand, and then therefore tamping down what's really going on? Or is there an advantage to having it out in the open?
No, there's an advantage to having it out. When I say nice, I just mean treat people with respect and kindness. Don't if the physician's first oath is to do no harm, what if we could just be human beings that try to do no harm?
Yeah. What I really want, at least for the purposes of this conversation, is the ability for us to all just be able to take a collective breath and to mean it, to take a genuine collective breath. I'm still stuck in 2015. I'm stuck prior to that, but with oh jeez, his name went out of my head, from Staten Island, the man who was murdered by the police in Staten Island in 15, right after Michael Brown. The I can't breathe as he was being choked.
Mm-hmm.
And when we went to vigil here at a church, it occurred to me that, and I've taught this at Hakafah a lot, so those who made it this far in this conversation are going to fast forward at this part. And I've probably told you this before, that the closest pronunciation of God's ineffable name, Yud He Vav He, is a breath. Mm. Which, to me, every breath we take then is a prayer or an expression of the divine. And to take that away from anybody, especially spiritual people. I'm not saying that he was particularly spiritual, but that you take away a breath. To me, I just want people to be able to breathe. Is that on your side?
Makes perfect sense.
I'm talking about, do you hear voices right now? Is there something going on your side, a conversation behind you? No?
No.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, we'll see if this picks up. Maybe God's responding.
Yeah, What you say makes a lot of sense about just taking a breath. Um, Last Sunday, 2 days ago for us was Pentecost. Right? It's the coming of God's breath, the
No,
Spirit,
that
the
sounds very
Word.
Pollyannish because I think it's a lot more than that, right? I think there's a lot more. I agree with you. I mean, you and I talked, and I talked here as well, that for me, the real cause behind all the symptoms is fear, existential fear,
Mhm.
uh, because of our zero sumness. That we are born into a society in particular and an economy that teaches that if you have, that means I don't, instead
Right.
of we have. And I think that fear is so at the core of so much of this primal existential fear. And we're not
Mhm.
allowed to name it. And we're not allowed to let it sit out there. And we're not allowed to reflect on it and with it. So we try to prevent it by feeding ourselves with materialism, by this faux protection with weaponry and violence and diminution of the other, which is really a diminution of ourselves. But now I'm preaching at you.
Preach it, brother. You're
No.
right. I think. Well, I think that's right. I think that fear is probably at the core of everything, and ultimately, maybe it's a fear of our own mortality and death.
Oh, ultimately, yeah. And the fact that what gives you power in most societies is the exploitation of that instead of the addressing of it.
Right.
It's a real sickness. It's a human sickness. So I guess what I really want is for us to become superhuman. But if you can't, then what's left?
Well, maybe what's left is a there could be a changed relationship to the recognition of our own mortality. That because my killing, in whatever sense that is, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, of another, doesn't extend my life, right? And so,
But it
what if we
validates my life in some weird way. I'm convinced that
maybe,
validates my life.
maybe, but it invalidates it as well, I think. So, what I'm wondering is, what if mortality, um, what if instead of fighting against it, we used it as the pointer to and the intensifier of life, of what really matters? That it's that mortality is like the frame around a beautiful painting, and the frame doesn't limit or diminish the painting; it intensifies and points to the beauty. But if you make the frame too ornate and give it too much attention, you lose the beauty of the painting.
So we have both, but you alluded to it. You've experienced a lot of pain, both personal and communal. Have you been able to reorient your understanding of life and mortality through that?
I think I think it's an ongoing process. Um, so um, two stories touch that for me. One, a couple weeks ago, I was having lunch with a guy in town, and he said his granddaughter was getting counseling at the Children's Bereavement Center. Her dad had died of brain cancer a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and the shooting happened. So she had a lot going on. She'd been going for several months, and her mom said, "You think it's helping or making any difference?" And the kid said, "I'm a whole lot less mad than I used to be."
Hmm.
And what I thought about that is, she didn't say I'm no longer mad. She said I'm less mad. And I think there comes a point that our pain and our feelings are hurt over what's happened isn't going to go away. But I think there's a way in which life grows larger than the pain and the hurt itself. Um, and so that's kind of my first story. My second story was this is probably 6 or 7 years ago. My wife and I were laying in bed one night talking, and she said, "Can you believe how lucky we got that we have such an amazing life?" And I just started crying. I mean, it took us years to get to that point after Brandon died that, you would, and I don't think either one of us would have ever thought one day we're going to say we have such an amazing life and how lucky are we. But she did. And I think that's what she's getting at, that the pain doesn't go away, but life enlarges, and there's a way to take loss and death. And if it doesn't intensify this moment in the life I have and help me not take a damn thing for granted, then I've missed the point.
Hmm.
Everything is precious. I mean, we believe in life, and life is precious beyond belief.
My son Noah, the tattoo artist, everyone always laughs when I say that. He just participated in Healing Inc.
Mm.
I don't know if I told you about this. This guy who it started in Israel, going to areas where there were terror attacks and tattooing victims as a healing mechanism, and they've spread all over the country, all over the
Mm.
world. So they came to Highland Park this weekend, and Noah was one of 2 or 3 local artists to participate in um, just being with folks a year later as they're still trying to navigate and memorialize
Yeah.
and trying to. It's so sticky. It's so sticky. It's so hard. There's so many layers. And the expectation of being able to find joy again
Mm-hmm.
seems overwhelming. What does what does Uvalde look like 5 years from now?
Um, I don't know. Um, I think that's the question. And I think that's I think that's the question, and I think that's up to us. I mean, that was my Pentecost sermon. So the Spirit comes, and St. Luke quotes Joel saying something about your sons and daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall see visions, they'll dream dreams. Um, and so that's what I said. I said, we've prophesy. I mean, if you believe the Spirit has come, then you have to prophesy. And prophets aren't predicting the future. They're telling us what's going to happen if we continue doing the same old thing we've always done. And is that the life you want to give your kids and grandkids? Those who are going to come after you. What are your visions for Uvalde? What's your best dream for Uvalde? Not in the sense of wishful thinking, but dreaming that sacred imagination out of which something that does not yet exist comes into being.
Hmm.
And so I told him, you've got to prophesy, you've got to see visions, you've got to dream, but that's only the start of it, because the other reading for us that day is the disciples locked in the house for fear. Jesus shows up in the middle of them and breathes on them and says, "Receive the Holy Spirit. As the Father sent me, I send you." And I said, so you've been inspired. You've been breathed into the breath, the power, the life of God. And there's only one decision to decide. And what you decide will shape the future of Uvalde and the life and the world you leave your kids and grandkids. And the question is this: will we continue to breathe the same old, stale, and suffocating air of our locked house? Or will we unlock the door and go? Same decision the disciples had to make. So my hope is that over the next 5 years, we'll start unlocking doors and we'll get outside and we'll breathe some fresh air. And we'll take a breath, exactly what you hoped for. We'll just take a breath, all right? Share a breath, be in conspiracy, breathe together.
Oh, good word. Oh, that was great. Oh, I'm applauding that. Be in conspiracy, breathe together. Well, so how was it received? Sounds like a great sermon. I'm listening.
I liked it. I don't know if they did not. but you know, I mean, I'm always preaching to myself.
Oh yeah, I love the eyes, the glassy eyes. They're so wonderful. Oh my God. Hey, Mike. You've been a real blessing.
Well, it's a joy to be with you, Bruce. Great privilege. I'm grateful for your friendship.
Yeah, you too. I'm looking forward to seeing where it takes us and seeing how we can maybe do this in 3D. I keep telling you to get up here, and you keep blowing me off. I'm going to start getting offended pretty soon.
No, I want to do that.
I told you February is the best time. February is the best time. It's the warmest time. There's the most to do.
Yeah. I don't have enough clothes to come in February.
Global warming capital of the United States. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Anything else you want to leave us with?
Just grateful for you, Bruce, and what you're doing. You know,
Yeah, good.
Conversations like these can go a long ways.
Yeah, you know, like I said, we brought Brad on, and it's been nice having him from Parkland, and we've been reaching out to others as well, less successfully. And part of me really wants to do that, and part of me is really glad that it's not.
Yeah,
because I've really, you know, I've enjoyed this this time with you, and it's been incredibly cathartic as we navigate similar spaces.
Yeah.
So thank you, my friend.
Yep.
And I look forward to our next conversation.
I do too. Thank you very much.
All right, y'all. We'll see you next time at our next episode. Take care.